I recently bought a simple scratching post for my cat and he hasn't used it at all, and I think that's because it's too small for him. I really should have paid more attention to the dimensions on the box because it's clearly designed for a small cat or a kitten. So I'm going to give that one away to a friend of mine who's got a kitten, and today I'm going to build a new scratching post for my cat. And I'm going to use this pallet to make the scratching post. You might recognise this one actually because this is the one that I picked up in my How to Get Wood for Free video. I've also bought this sisal rope. I bought this on Amazon. This is a natural fibre rope and is recommended for cat scratching posts, and I got 30 metres of it for about £6 or £7. And my general idea is to use these pieces to make the actual scratching post itself, and I'll use the pallet wood slats to make a hexagonal base for the post.
I began by dismantling the pallet using a crowbar. Then I cleaned up the edges of the stringers on the table saw to get them all to a consistent size.
I'm going to glue all these pieces together with the nail holes facing inwards so that they're not visible. And some of the surfaces aren't particularly straight at the moment, so I'm going to use a hand plane to clean them up, and that will give me a better glue surface.
I applied wood glue and clamped the 4 pieces together.
Now I can cut the slats into pieces to form the hexagon base. I need to tilt my miter saw to 30 degrees. I want the hexagon base to be about 32 centimeters wide, and I've worked out that the outside edge of each piece that will form the hexagon needs to be 160 millimeters. So with a 30-degree cut here, I need to measure in 160 millimeters from that point. So I've made a mark and I need to offer that up with the blade. And now I can use a stop lock on the fence so that I can make repeatable cuts. I cut a couple of extra pieces and now I can choose the pieces that I like the grain on the most. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And now I can glue these up.
I used masking tape to keep the pieces together for the glue up. I used the surface of my workbench to make sure that the bottom of the hexagon was flat.
Now I can leave that to dry. I've got a scrap piece of plywood here, and while the hexagon is drying, I'm going to mark up the inside of the shape and cut that out on the bandsaw. This piece of ply is now a nice snug friction fit, and now I can glue that in place. I want the scratching post to be quite heavy so that it doesn't move around, and I was thinking of cutting an old piece of kitchen worktop that's 40mm thick to this shape to add some weight. But then I remembered I had some leftover concrete from my recent mobile camera stand build, and I've really got no other use for this, and I thought it might make quite an interesting look. So that's what I'm going to use for the base. I've applied some of this Unibond power glue. This is quite a thick gel-like kind of glue, and I've done that just in an attempt to try and seal any gaps so that when I add the concrete, any moisture doesn't soak through to the other side. I'm also going to apply some of this packaging tape to the inside, and that will help seal the gaps too. So with the post glued up, now I can just clean up the edges on the miter saw. I've tilted my table saw blade and now I can cut away some of the excess. And I've marked up this oval shape for the post. I'm going to use the spoke shave to finish off rounding over the post. So I was busy shaping this with the spoke shave and this happened. The glue has failed. This had about 5 or 6 hours to set, so I'm very surprised that this has happened. It's never happened to me before. I suspect it's due to the temperature, which here in the shop is about 7 degrees Celsius, and I've read the label on the glue bottle and it does say not to use it below 10 degrees. I'm assuming as well that it won't take a great amount of pressure to actually separate the other two pieces. Cleaning all the glue off this and re-gluing it is not very appealing to me right now, mainly because I wanted to get the concrete laid on this tonight. So I'm going to admit defeat and look for something else to use for the post. I've got this piece of pine, which I believe came from a pallet too, and it's nice and thick, so I should be able to get a similar shape out of this. It's a bit of a shame that this is not going to match the wood used on the hexagon shape, but seeing as most of this is going to be covered in sisal rope anyway, I'm going to go for it.
This time I used a hand plane to round over the post as the spoke shave wasn't cutting this wood particularly cleanly.
I'm pretty happy with the shape of this now. I'm just about ready to start with the concrete now, but before I do that, I'm just going to drive a few screws into the bottom of the post. And that's just so that the concrete has an anchor.
I mixed up the concrete as per the instructions on the bag and added it to the base. Then I could screed off the excess.
Now I'm going to try and get some of the air bubbles out.
I left it alone for 3 days for the concrete to set. Apologies for the poor footage here, it was starting to get dark and I didn't realise the camera would have such a problem in this light. Here I'm sanding both the concrete top of the base and the wooden hexagon. I decided to cut a top cap for the post just to make it look a bit more finished, and I used a scrap piece of sapele for this. I marked up the shape, cut it out on the bandsaw, and then sanded up to the marks that I'd made using the disc sander. Then I could apply glue and stick it in place. I added a brick to apply some pressure and just made sure that the edges were flush before I left it to set. When the glue had dried, I did some sanding just to get the edges flush. I applied some antique pine brie wax to the base, the post and the concrete. I used a brush to apply it and a cloth to take off the excess wax. I used a couple of these roofing nails to secure the sisal rope to the post. I used an F-clamp to push it into the wood. And I wrapped the rope around the post as tightly as I possibly could. that's the scratching post done, and I've probably got enough rope left to do another one, so I'll probably save this for when this one gets worn out and then I can replace the rope. I didn't bother adding any glue because when the fibres of the rope are pushed up as tightly together as they are, as you can see from my scratching, the rope really doesn't want to move anywhere.